On the money.
Lisa Leong with you. Well, if you're thinking about downsizing, you might also be considering renting rather than buying, and currently build to rent is all the buzz for retirees and those looking for affordable housing. Rachel Lane from Aged Care Gurus joins you. Hello, Rachel.
Good morning.
Well, Melbourne is being seen as the build to rent capital of the world at the moment. What is it?
Okay, well, it's a little bit as it sounds. So basically, the residential developer builds a building for the purpose of renting out all of the apartments directly to tenants. So instead of having that middle line where people own the apartments and then they have tenants, or some of them own or occupy, the whole building is built for the purpose of tenants living there.
And what's the main difference from retirement villages, for example?
Yeah, so a lot of these developments do have similar amenities to a retirement village. I guess one of the big differences is that they appeal to all different ages. So you will get everything from, young single people going to university, young families through to retirees. But you will find some really great amenities. So you will find yoga decks, you will find spaces set up so that you can work from home. There's even special podcast studios in some of them, swimming pools, gymnasiums, a lot of the cinemas that are specifically for the residents, rooftop barbecue areas and things like that. So a lot of those amenities are quite similar to what you find in a retirement village, I guess.
And when we're talking about build to rent, one of the main things is that there's one landlord. So rather than having lots of potentially even investment properties in this one location, there's one landlord for the whole build.
Exactly, and that can be a good thing. So you can negotiate directly with that landlord, and because they've got a vested interest in having, 200, 300 apartments rented, you can negotiate with them. So a lot of them won't charge you a residential tenancies bond, for example. You can negotiate the term. So one of the drawbacks of renting can be that you've only got a 12-month lease and you have that sort of insecurity around your tenure. You can negotiate a long-term lease with the developer, so that might be of interest to you. And in that negotiation, you can negotiate the rent rises, so you're not getting any kind of nasty surprises down the track. But I guess on the flip side, retirement villages and even normal strata type developments either have an owners corporation or a resident association that represents the rights and the interests of the people who live there. When you're renting directly from the developer, there is no such kind of association so it can be difficult to negotiate rents in that way, and rent rises can occur, and they're not too much you can do about that.
We're speaking with Rachel Lane. She's from Aged Care Gurus, and if you have a question about downsizing, 1300 222 774, or you could text 0437 774 774. How might it affect your age pension if you are thinking about going to a build to rent?
Yeah, so I guess build to rent is one of the things is people think that it's cheap. It's not cheap. It is kind of sometimes intrinsically linked to low cost housing, but it's not necessarily cheap. In fact, a lot of the rents are sort of 20 to 30% higher than if you're looking at a 2-bedroom apartment, for example. So knowing you wanted to chat about this, I did a little bit of a search. And if you're looking at a 2-bedroom apartment at the Mirvac development near the Queen Vic Market, you're going to look at somewhere between $900 and $1,000 a week for rent. So that might be more expensive than another 2-bedroom apartment. But typically the reason they charge the premium is because they've got the rooftop deck, they've got the swimming pool, they've got the yoga deck, they've got the podcast studios, they've got the lounges, they've got all of those amenities. So in a way, you're not just renting the apartment, you're also renting all of these other spaces and facilities and amenities that they're building for the residents.
And how might that affect? Does that mean it's not an asset though?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So coming back to your question about pension. So if you don't own your home, well then, you're just swapping from whatever you're renting now to there, if you can afford to do so. If you do own your home, you've got to be very careful about what that means for your pension. So when you're a homeowner, you can have a single person, $280,000 of assets outside your house because your house is exempt. If you're a couple, that's $419,000. When you become a non-homeowner, those thresholds only increase by $224,500. So the odds are you're going to get more than $224,500 for your house, and therefore it's going to impact on your pension. So even though you get these higher thresholds, once you go over those thresholds, so call it, $504,000 for a single and $643,000 for a couple. Once you go over that, pension is reduced under the asset test at $7,800 a year per $100,000 of assets. And that can be really tough to replace. I know interest rates are going up, but 7.8%, guaranteed, you're not going to get 7.8% guaranteed. So you've got to make sure that you understand what that impact is. If you do still keep your pension, though, that build to rent scenario, you can claim rent assistance. So that can mean another, $150 odd on top of your pension each fortnight.
You're listening to Lisa Leong on ABC Radio Melbourne and Victoria, and On the Money with Rachel Lane from Aged Care Gurus. Call through on 1300 222 774. It's Carol. Hello, Carol.
Hi, how are you?
Good. What's your question for Rachel?
I was just wondering, under the Centrelink age pension rules, if you sell and then buy a residential property, do they look at the net cost or the gross cost when they're looking at your assets?
Could you explain that to me a little bit more?
Well, when there's conveyancing, you have all sorts of costs and different amounts, in the settlement. But the Centrelink look at the actual cost of your house originally, or the gross or the net.
Well, any of those costs would be reducing your bank balance. So, but they just look at the amount that you pay for your home. One of the things that Centrelink have changed, so there's lots of incentives that the government are trying to bring out to encourage people to downsize. I prefer the word right size, right? Because it's not really, downsize has some negative connotations. But one of the incentives that was introduced on the 1st of January this year is that they will double the period of time for which you can have an asset test exemption on the proceeds of the sale of your current home before you buy or build your new one. So for some people, particularly at the moment with the property market being a bit softer than what it has been in years gone by, they want to sell their house before they buy. They want that certainty of knowing how much money they've got. Other people are speculating that their house is going to continue to go down in value as interest rates go up. And because of that, they would rather sell sooner and buy later. So what Centrelink is saying is it used to be that whatever the proceeds of that sale that you were going to use for your home, it used to be exempt for 12 months. You can now have an exemption for 24 months. So that's great. Takes a bit of the time pressure away from finding something. And under extenuating circumstances, and we see this a little bit at the moment with building timeframes getting blown out, you can have a further extension of 12 months. So maximum 36-month asset test exemption on those proceeds that you're going to use. The other thing that they've done is it used to be that those proceeds were included in your deemed assets with, the first, depending on whether you're single or couple, the first asset threshold earns 0.25%. Everything above earns 2.25. Now what they're saying is the proceeds that you need to buy your new home will only be deemed to earn the lower rate, the 0.25% rate. So lots of kind of benefits to that.
Thank you so much, Carol, for your call on 1300 222 774. Hope that answered your question. And if you have any questions for Rachel, 0437 774 774 or 1300 222 774, answering general questions, of course, here on The Money. So we've been talking about downsizing, or right-sizing, as you like to put it, and people really considering whether they might go down a retirement village or going down the rent to buy. What are other things that we should be considering when we're either advising a loved one or considering ourselves what's the best place to go?
Yeah. And this is where it does get a little bit hippie, right? So just bear with me for a second. But it's actually all about the vibe. So you've got to find a place that you feel like you belong, in terms of the accommodation and things of that nature. But you've also got to find your tribe. You've got to find the people that you want to hang out with day in, day out, because that is actually the greatest predictor of whether or not you're going to enjoy your new home. So people sometimes choose a retirement village, for example, based on location. They say, well, I live here and that retirement village down the road, I'll just move down there because I like being in this particular location. And they don't necessarily do their homework or do their research around what is it like to live in that village. So it's really important. And people then say to me, well, how can I do that research? How do I know? I said, go to any of the social there is a social activity menu as long as your arm, literally. So look at it, circle the activities that are of interest to you, i.e. if you lived there that you would want to participate in, and go along to those. Get permission, of course, but go along to those and meet the people who live there and get a really good sense of what it's like.
Just on that vibe point, we were talking about rent to buy and the fact that it is quite a new concept that really is exploding in Melbourne at the moment. Is there a particular vibe to the people they're trying to attract in terms of retirees for rent to buy accommodation, Rachel?
Well, and you're right, these build to rent developments, they do seem to be picking a particular genre of people. So some of them are very much aimed towards younger people who want to, do their podcasts, want to go to university, but there are definitely developments out there that are very much geared towards retirees. So, it is one of those things. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter whether your downsizing decision is to, move into a granny flat, move into, co-housing with lifelong friends, move into a retirement village, move into a land lease community. What is the most important thing about that decision is to think about how you want your lifestyle to be and whether or not this is conducive to that,
We've got a text here from Maddie on 0437 774 774. Maddie from Dalesford, you ask, what's the situation renting a room or bungalow to a student? Is it still tax-free? Why can't pensioners rent out excess space in their homes as tax-free income like renting to a student? Rachel?
Yeah, look, you need to be very careful about doing things like that. And it's not just about pension. It's also the fact that you're turning your principal place of residence, which is normally exempt from capital gains tax, into an asset that produces income, which means that you may in the future have to pay capital gains tax. So that's something that you really need advice on, not just about the consequences for your pension, but also for your tax and that future potential CGT liability.
Another text here on 0437 774 774. Are more people just going into smaller homes or are they going into villages?
Yeah, so a lot of people are downsizing into strata apartments or townhouses. I guess what you've got to think about is whether or not that, and it's the same thing, right? It comes back to that vibe. Whether or not that's the place for you. Will these people share the same lifestyle as you? So, for example, my mum has downsized into the Docklands, just around the corner here, and she loves it kind of most of the year. But around Christmas time, the kids put their money together and the apartments at the top are rented out on Airbnb, and sometimes full bottles of beer come over the balconies and parties just start at 2:00 in the morning. So you've got to think about, if I'm living in this development, do I share the same lifestyle as my neighbours? How is that going to impact on me?
It's actually your granny who's on the top floor, isn't it?
yeah, that naughty little duck, just hurling bottles of beer over the edge. But, you've got to think about that. And for that reason, a lot of people do that downsize. So they downsize into strata and they make that first downsize decision because, and I'm generalising, but they're living in a relatively big house in the suburbs. They used to know their neighbours. They used to be able to knock on the door for a cup of sugar. They used to have a barbecue every week and the kids would play. And that neighbourhood has changed and they don't necessarily know their neighbours anymore and they don't have that sense of community. They're downsizing into the strata development and they're finding they're just as socially isolated as they were before, but in a smaller home, which is of lower maintenance. And then they downsize into the retirement village because they realise that what they actually want is that community.
We're speaking with Rachel Lane for On the Money, and she's from Aged Care Gurus. We have a text here from Judy from East Bentley on 0437 774 774. Lisa Leong with you. I know I'm a terrible student, Rachel, and I've completely forgotten what RAD stands for. What does RAD stand for before I read this text out?
So it stands for Refundable Accommodation Deposit. So it's a
I'm never going to remember that unless I tattoo that on my arm. Refundable
Accommodation Deposit.
Okay, I'm going to read this out now. Everybody remembered that? Ro, did you remember that? Because I'm going to ask you again.
We'll test you at the end.
Here's the text from Judy from East Bentley. My mum is about to sell her house to pay for her aged care RAD. The proceeds will exceed her RAD by around $200,000. What's the amount of cash that will affect her pension?
Okay.
Have you got that?
Yep, got it.
Right.
So assuming that mum is a single pensioner, if she's a homeowner, the amount of assets she can have is $504,500 before her pension is affected under the asset test. But you've got to watch for the income test. So typically the income test will kick in sooner than that. And pension is calculated based on whichever test produces the worst outcome. So it's hard for me to know based on, whether she's just... If she has nothing, sells her house and puts $200,000 in the bank, I don't see a problem from either test point of view, but I'm not exactly sure what else is sitting there. One of the things I would say, and obviously you can't unsell a house, but one of the things I would say to anyone who is contemplating this type of decision is you don't have to sell your house. And you need to think very carefully about whether that's a good idea. So from the point of view that if you keep the house, the maximum asset value for aged care means testing that they apply to it is about $180,000. It's exempt from your pension asset test for 2 years, and it's not deemed to earn income. If you sell the house, any money that you put into the RAD is an assessable asset for calculating your aged care costs, and any money left over is assessable for the pension. So you've just got to weigh it up and work out, okay, because sometimes people get put off by paying the DAP, which is the interest on the unpaid RAD. Stay with me. But you've got to weigh it up and work out, okay, is that it seems logical, but is that the smartest thing to do?
I've got to get you rapping on that one day with the DAP and the RADs.
With the DAP and the RAD. There's RACs and DACs too for people who have their amount calculated by the government. I
feel like we need to do some sort of quiz, don't you think, Producer Rowe? Because if people have got their heads around this, I think it's very impressive. So, Judy from East Bentley, we hope that answered your question, but let us know if you've got further and better particulars on 0437 774 774, or you could even call 1300 222 774 to talk it through, and we'll give you general financial advice, only of information as well. Here's another one from Will. Will, you write, when are older pension-bound Australians going to stop paying stamp duty? It's a killer for older people upgrading their modest homes up until old age.
Yeah,
Rachel,
look,
comment?
I agree. House prices have gone through the roof and stamp duty is costing people enormous amounts of money. And that's where some people are realising that. So there's a bit of a perception that whatever home you buy next, you have to pay stamp duty, and it's simply not true, right? So if you're looking at downsizing into a retirement village, most contracts, so most of them operate on leasehold or licence arrangements, or if you're looking at downsizing into a land lease community, most contracts that you don't pay stamp duty. So when you're doing that analysis of comparing it to perhaps a strata title development, you need to factor in that is normally tens of thousands of dollars difference in the upfront cost because you don't have stamp duty in the retirement villages.
Got it. How is the cost of a whole-of-life lease for a retirement village unit treated for both taxation and pension purposes? That text through on 0437 774 774. Rachel?
Okay, I think what they're talking about is a lifetime lease. So different states call them different things. But essentially that's what I'm talking... When I'm talking about a leasehold, that's what I'm talking about. So sometimes people get nervous when you say leasehold, but as Paul's pointing out, it is for your life. So it's not like a 12-month tenancy type arrangement. You have a very long-term leasehold, in many cases registered on the operator's title, so you've got great security of tenure. In terms of the pension implications for that, Paul, it depends on how much you pay. So if the amount you pay, I'll deal with the most common scenario. If the amount you pay is more than $224,500, then for pension purposes, Centrelink will say you're a homeowner. Whatever amount you've paid for your home is an exempt asset and you won't qualify for rent assistance. Likewise, the reverse is true if you pay less than $224,500. So if you pay less than $224,500, your home is assessable as an asset, but you get the higher asset threshold, so there's no detriment. But under those circumstances, you can qualify for rent assistance.
All right, hope that helps. And Tony from Eltham has texted through 0437 774 774. Lisa, in my suburb, 20 kilometres northeast of the CBD, downsizing to a townhouse costs more than the sale proceeds of a house on its own block. No point even considering it. Yeah. Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an interesting phenomenon that we're seeing where in the past it used to be that all of the value was in the land, but as we're getting an ageing demographic, people are more attracted to low maintenance, so the smaller blocks, the smaller homes and things of that nature, and it's actually pushing those prices up. And in some cases you can find in suburbs that the older established homes on the bigger blocks are actually not worth as much, exactly as Tony's saying, are not necessarily worth as much.
You can call 1300 222 774. You could press the call button on the ABC Listen app if you're listening to us that way, or you can text through on 0437 774 774. How about this one, Rachel? I'm on the age pension. I received the final long service leave payout. This caused my pension to be reduced. How long will it be reduced for? Just the financial year or something else? That's a little tricky technical question, I think.
A little
Too tricky? Too technical.
So I can come back to you with an answer on that, though.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. So we will come back to you with an answer on that one. How about this one, Judy, Box Hill South? The thing about downsizing for us seniors is all smaller houses have stairs. Okay, until you can't manage them. All blocks with single dwellings are replaced with 2 or 3 units with upper levels. So that's sort of talking about the developments which have replaced some of those lower levels with trying to do the lower and upper level. That's a good point, though.
Yeah, and that's something to be aware of. When you're looking at downsizing, you've got to look at your accommodation, because most people who are downsizing are still really fit and healthy and active. And you're so right, Judy, you've got to look at your accommodation, not necessarily through the lens of what you can do now, but what you might be able to do in the future and whether or not it is age-in-place friendly. So does it have nice wide doorways that if you needed a little Zimmer frame type thing that you can get through the doorways? Does it have bathrooms that don't have lips on the shower and things of that nature? Can you navigate the lounge room and the kitchen? And it's so important. Obviously, if you're going into retirement villages, they're purpose built with that in mind. You might not see grab rails on the walls and things like that, but the anchors are inside the wall so that if you need it, they can put it on. So you've got to think about, I think the point Judy's making is fantastic. Think about your accommodation, not just for what you can do now, but what you might be able to do in 10 years' time, particularly if you don't want to move again.
Rosa, you've texted through on 0437 774 774. Hi, Rachel. Can you explain land lease, please?
Sure. Okay. So land lease communities sometimes get called different things. They sometimes get called lifestyle villages. They sometimes get called manufactured home parks. They have a few different names, but I guess the overarching label for them is land lease communities. They're different to retirement villages. So how they work is you buy your home and you lease the land on which your home sits. So they operate very much like a caravan park structure. So you own the home and lease the land, and the fee that you pay to lease the land is called site fees. Now, with that, those rules that I was talking about before, about $224,500, that all goes out the window. Whatever you pay for your home, you're a homeowner, right? So that's an exempt asset. But you can claim rent assistance in land lease communities because you rent the land on which your house sits. So those site fees, yeah.
And is that the main advantage to why people might do that?
They tend to offer different accommodation, so you tend to get bigger houses. You tend to have more people living there, and they tend to be quite a distance from metropolitan areas, whereas you tend to find the opposite with retirement villages.
Question from Louise, 0437 774 774. Louise, you have texted in to say, Mum has recently sold her home with the thought of downsizing. She was told by Centrelink that her pension will be reduced by $800 because she's earning interest on the settlement price. Is that correct?
So it goes back to those rules I was talking about before, Louise, and it will depend on whether or not she sold her home before or after the 1st of January this year. But if it was after the 1st of January this year, then it's really about how much of the proceeds she's going to spend on her new home. So whatever she's going to, let's assume it was after 1 January, whatever amount she's going to spend for her new home is an exempt asset for 2 years, maybe 3 if she's going to build, and the amount that she's going to spend on her new home will only be deemed at the 0.25%.
Louise, we're going to sneak you through on 1300 222 774. Hello, Louise. What's your quick question for Rachel before the news?
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for taking my call. We've recently sold Mum's home with the idea of her downsizing, and we were told by Centrelink this week that her pension would be reduced by $800 a fortnight because we're earning interest on the settlement price that we've put in until she purchases another home. Is that correct?
Well, it is, except that to the extent that she's going to use that money for her new home, she should be able to get an asset test exemption on that particular amount. So I'll just use round figures. Let's say she sold her home for $1 million and she's going to use $700,000 of that to buy or build her new home. That $700,000, they changed the rules for people who sold their home after 1 January. So that $700,000 is an exempt asset for 12 or 24 months, and it should just be deemed at the lower deeming rate of 0.25%.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your call, Louise from Armidale, and thank you for coming in, Rachel Lane.
You're very welcome.
Rachel Lane from Aged Care Gurus, taking your calls.